A group of demonstrators traveled from Arizona to the White House to make one demand: no more deportations. These are the family members of deportees, and some, like 19-year-old Naira Zapata, are going one step further. She will only be drinking water until President Obama hears her plea to allow her husband to be reunited with his children.
Para que Obama nos escuche, para que vea que esto de ser deportado injustamente, separado por nuestras familias, es algo duro y algo doloroso, y queremos que él sienta este dolor que ahorita nosotros estamos sintiendo.
But President Obama said that his administration is not interested in deporting folks like Naira's husband.
If we're going to go after folks who are here illegally, we should do it smartly and go after folks who are criminals, gangbangers, people who are hurting the community. Not after students, not after folks who are here just because they're trying to figure out how to feed their families.
However, based on a New York Times government data analysis, they found that under President Obama, 2/3 of the nearly 2 million deportation cases involve people who committed minor infractions, like getting a traffic ticket, or those who had no criminal record at all. Naira said her husband is one of them, and he's a man of character who took care of his family.
Él es un hombre trabajador, un buen padre, un buen esposo, un buen amigo. Si él no fuera nada de eso, yo no estuviera aquí peleando por él. Solamente quiero que él sepa que lo extraño y yo haría lo que sea, no solamente por él, pero para ayudar a familias que están pasando por lo mismo.
President Obama has deported more than 2 million immigrants since he's taken office, making him the U.S. president who has deported more people than any other U.S. president in history. Protesters today said that he could change all that with a simple executive order.
So the president right now, like, I would tell him, there's no humane way to separate a family, to not have a 3-year-old growing with his dad and not have a baby when just coming to this world, seeing them. And right now, if he really would wanted to, today he could stop all deportations and who can give the fair action for all.
Arizona DREAM Act Coalition organizer Reina Montoya came to the United States as an undocumented teenager. She's been able to stay in the U.S. after President Obama signed an executive order deferring deportation for those brought to the United States as children, otherwise known as dreamers. Reina says that the president could expand that to include an even larger undocumented population, but the president said that would go too far.
But if we start broadening that, then essentially I would be ignoring the law in a way that I think would be very difficult to defend legally. So that's not an option.
But another option would be for the president to adjust the current method of enforcing immigration policy. Author of the book, The Right to Stay Home: How U.S. Policy Drives Mexican Migration, David Bacon, said President Obama has the authority to stop law enforcement from trolling payrolls looking for undocumented workers.
This is a kind of a particularly brutal technique, which is sort of euphemistically called self-deportation, because the object of it is to make life so unbearable and so unpleasant for people who are undocumented that people will simply leave the United States. Of course, what happens is that people don't actually leave the United States. They wind up being driven into an economy in which people are forced to work at jobs that pay even less than minimum wage, or which are have other conditions which are illegal, simply because they're being driven out of the jobs that they have, which actually do provide a decent living. All of these things are at the discretion of the president.
Bacon also said the president has the discretion to stop treating those migrating to the United States as criminals.
The Department of Homeland Security goes into federal court in Tucson, for instance, into a federal court called Operation Streamline. And in this courtroom every day, dozens and dozens of people who have simply walked across the border are sentenced to federal prison terms. That's a prosecutorial discretion. He doesn't have to do that. He can tell the Department of Justice to stop.
With this considerable growth in convictions comes the growth of detention centers. As you can see, in 1981, there were 18 facilities in the entire U.S., with a daily population of 54 detainees. Jump to 2011, and you can see the number of facilities has gone up to 204, with a daily population of more than 32,000.
We have had an enormous growth in the United States in privately run detention centers for immigrants. That's a euphemism. What we're really talking about are prisons, federal prisons that are run by private corporations in which people are imprisoned because they don't have papers, basically. So this is, again, the criminalization of people who don't have papers, being held as though they were criminals guilty of some crime. The companies that run it, there are two big ones. One is called Corrections Corporation of America, and the other one is called the Geo Corporation. They also run private prisons for prisoners in the criminal justice system. So these are for-profit corporations that are making hundreds of millions of dollars off of this incarceration system. And this is also the federal government contracting out the responsibility for housing deportees and detainees to these corporations.
Both Geo Group and Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, are publicly traded companies. But last year, both companies were exempt from paying tens of millions in taxes because they switched their status to being a special trust. Not surprisingly, these companies also spend millions on PACs and lobbying firms to advocate for influence on Capitol Hill. Most campaign contributions do go to Republicans, but there are Democrats who make their list as well.
These corporations act like pretty much any other corporation, and that is that they give campaign contributions to any elected official that will further their agenda. And their agenda is the expansion of this deportation system. For instance, they lobbied with the administration and with Congress to establish an actual quota of 34,000 beds in this system that had to be occupied by a prisoner, a detainee or a deportee prisoner every day. So that basically expanded the system enormously. And of course, they can give campaign contributions. I think that's really a polite way of saying bribe elected officials in order to support these bills, which then turn around to make money for them by putting people into these inhuman and brutal conditions.
These inhumane and brutal conditions are what President Obama said he'll be reviewing. Last month, he ordered the Department of Homeland Security to conduct a system-wide review of the way it enforces the nation's immigration laws. Some see this push by Democrats as a way to hold on to the Hispanic community's vote, with 71% of Hispanic voters voting for President Obama in the 2012 election, according to the Pew Research Center. But hunger striker Jose Valdez says the Hispanic community is not a pawn in this political game.
Esta no es una manera de que los republicanos o los demócratas miren a la comunidad inmigrante como política. No somos política, somos humanos. Los humanos no somos política en cuestiones de que tengamos a nuestras familias detenidas.
This is a message that they will be taking to lawmakers on Capitol Hill as they continue their indefinite hunger strike, hoping to stop not just the deportation of their family members, but the deportations of more than 1,100 people on a daily basis. For the Real News Network, Jessica Devereaux, Washington.